Welcome back to another Too Late to Care review. Today I am reviewing Haiku the Robot. It's one of the many Metroidvanias that have populated Steam since Hollow Knight's release, and while Haiku may not be the best in the genre, I still enjoyed what it had to offer. Now, a big selling point for this game was that the developers strove to recreate that Game Boy aesthetic. But I don't think that gives them enough credit because Game Boy games do not look this good. Shit, this game can even make some Game Boy Advance games blush, especially in the color palette department. And it's remarkable how much the game achieves with just so little. Each zone uses a single color and a few of its hues, yet it all feels very cohesive, thanks to that same brownish purple shade tying together every piece of machinery and level foreground. It's a clever application of color theory that transforms the world into one vast living factory instead of the disconnected backdrops you often see in Hollow Knight-like games. This is especially helpful when the setting is post-apocalyptic, as things tend to be drab and colorless, and usually means the game will suffer in the visual department. Just look at Rage, Mad Max, and Borderlands 1. Haiku could have easily been another example of the brown assault you see on the screen. Yet by prioritizing a single color for each area, the game added depth to the background and foreground using subtle changes in saturation. You know, this may sound small when I point it out, but we have to give them their flowers because it's these small details that set games apart. Of course, that doesn't mean Haiku is perfect. It still falls into the basic trappings that most 2D Metroidvanias find themselves in, which is a lack of zone readability. Even on my second playthrough of the game, I had to rely on the map to a crippling degree, which isn't exactly new for the genre. I think Blasphemous and Nine Souls were the only games I didn't have this problem with, though in both of those games, the zoomed out camera and the focus on narrative landmarks allowed me to recognize stages more easily. But that isn't the case with Haiku, since it features a more zoomed in camera, and despite my previous praise, the aforementioned simple color palette. So it seems that this was an unavoidable trade-off. Another unavoidable trade-off can be observed in the game's combat, because while yes, it is simple and gets the job done, that's really all there is to it. Even with the power-ups provided later in the game, they do not do enough to change how you interact with most enemies, especially when you consider that the most useful offensive chips only make the sword, the de facto weapon of the game, even better. Now, it's here where we reach an impasse. If the game strove for simplicity, is it fair to critique the game on said simplicity? Or, to better reframe this question, is this a case of taking too much inspiration to the detriment of the overall experience? I personally think the game has already made changes to improve on the foundation it's built upon. So while I can appreciate that some aspects are straightforward, that doesn't mean I'm going to ignore the pain points I ran into. For example, the game offers 3 methods to damage an enemy. There's the sword, the much later acquired bomb ability, and the third, a chip-exclusive ability to produce electricity. We know the sword is the best option. It not only can be upgraded with chips, but also gets stronger with each major boss defeated. The bomb, while a great choice with great chips, requires heat to pull off, a resource used for dashing and healing. And while this may not be an issue for the late game, where you have a fully upgraded cooling kit, no player is going to use this early on, since dashing is the most crucial ability in boss fights, and therefore will naturally not be incorporated in their fights. Electricity, on the other hand, while not having a heat requirement, doesn't get a noticeable upgrade in damage, so by the time you are in the late game, it's doing even less damage since the enemies in the later areas have scaled with the player's sword. Lightning feels especially clunky, as the abilities either augment other skills or give you an electric, non-reactive ability. So what I'm trying to highlight here is the illusion of choice the game has. Why use the bomb when you can just mash the sword with a chance to crit? Why use anything other than the sword? And to be clear, it's not that I think the chips themselves are bad, it's that they're hindered by the game's main option of dealing with enemies, which brings us back to that downside of simplicity. I think if this game ever gets a sequel, they should explore the player utilizing weapons that incorporate other ways of dealing with enemies. A light rod that uses electricity, or maybe seeds for summoning plants. Methods that allow the chip system to really shine. I realize I'm basically describing Blasphemous 2 here, but I actually think that game is a bad example of introducing multiple weapons. So I understand that what I'm describing is easier said than done. With all that said, the developer did nail the combat with the sword, despite my rambling about the lack of diversity. Now from this point on, I'd like to discuss the story. So if you'd like to play this game and don't want to be spoiled, you should just buy it. I recommend it if you're looking for a solid Metroidvania, but if you don't care, then enjoy the rest of the video. Humans have polluted the world. In response, 4 humans transferred their consciousness to robots. which then became the creators and main bosses of the game, who also subsequently built the whole underground robot utopia you find yourself in. The fourth creator began experimenting with life and tried to recreate a being similar to a human. The other three creators, who have forgotten their original identities by the way, are furious with the idea of organic life returning to their world and create a virus to take down the fourth creator. The virus works a little too well, not only infecting the target, but also any machine life form it comes into contact with. With all four creators falling victim, the once robot utopia has now become a violent factory slowly falling apart. It's at this time that the player character, a creation of the fourth creator, awakens and sets out to combat the virus. And that's the gist of what's going on, albeit excluding the occasional detail here and there. The problem I have with this story is really its execution. Unfortunately, for the majority of the game, you will be bogged down by pointless chatter discussing frankly unimportant details. And yes, some characters do help push the narrative forward, but they are far and few between. Most of the time, you will find NPCs bogged down the journey with unnecessary interactions and dialogue. A good example of this is the villages you see throughout the game. At most, you will encounter 2 interactable NPCs who may give you a small quest or just chat with you. The rest of the village will consist of non-interactable robots that simply exist, and even the characters who do discuss the virus do so by providing very little information. Really, the most significant chunk of lore is the second/true ending, which just flat out tells you who created the virus and how it spread. It's a shame really, because I believe there was an opportunity to hint at the fourth creator in a more concrete way without taking away from the mystique. Especially since all 4 were admired as deities, I find it hard to imagine that you will only get bits and pieces, which include the secret diary entries from the other 3, which, if read early, means very little to the player at the time. I just think it would have been nice if, through the use of different characters, the fourth creator is at least mentioned, but only in a vague sense that he existed, almost as if their memory was foggy, and then the player can put the pieces together with what they can find through the aforementioned lore drops. But as far as I can remember, most of the dialogue in the game is reserved for complaining about the virus and how life sucks, albeit with an ironic tone. I do want to give the game a little credit on the narrative front, at least. It is an interesting story, and it does provide environmental clues for there being a fourth creator. However, if you are playing the game in spurts, I don't think this would be enough for the player to feel truly satisfied with said story. With all that said, I don't regret the time I spent playing this game. So much so that I beat the game again in corrupt mode. So it's fair to say I did really like it. And I think you will too if you enjoy the genre, that is. That's really all I have to say about this game. So if you want to see more game reviews, subscribe. I also do drama videos here and there when something's fun to talk about. So if you're curious about that, I recommend checking out my other videos. And yeah, I hope you have a great day.